friends, welcome back. Today is our beginner workout. It's not really a workout, it's more of kind of a biomechanical reset for your shoulders. So just to reiterate, I talked about this in the beginning. The shoulders are kind of like this prehistoric flying wingspan that are really only attached at the collarbone. So basically right here. So what I find is that a lot of times frozen shoulder, shoulder impingement, shoulder dysfunction comes when people can't separate the motion of their shoulder blade from their arm bone. So everything we're going to do today involves re-emphasizing that in different planes of motion and ranges of motion. One of the concepts that I talk a lot about with my clients is that we walk from the second chakra area, so don't get distracted by the woo, but we've got a triangle here, and that if we flip that triangle, we have a triangle of the ball and socket teetering on the diaphragm. So here it's the ball and socket connecting into the pelvic floor area. So all of these motions that we're gonna do is kind of trying to establish the connection that you don't need to use your neck muscles to move your shoulders, or really even your shoulder muscles. It's more about leveraging through the top of your core. I'm gonna do this with both arms and not a ton of repetitions, but I would encourage you to start with the shoulder that isn't bothering you first, and then allow that shoulder to teach the other shoulder what the proper mechanics are. So first, you're just gonna try to let your shoulders drop backwards into a floor, and then you wanna feel like your ridges of your shoulder blades are anchored onto the earth. Now you're going to reach and see if you can feel that contraction of the diaphragm pulling backwards as you reach your arms up. And then you're just gonna drop the shoulders. So we'll do that 2 more times. If you reach up on an exhale, you might feel that contraction better. Okay, now we're gonna go both arms overhead, so I'm really pressing the ridges of my shoulder blades towards the table. And then to come back, I'm still anchoring backwards. It's a ball and socket joint, right? So you wanna keep the ball bearing aspect of it planted. I'm inhaling over. Exhale, I'm gonna lead with my diaphragm and then let my arms just float up. You might find that you get a gentle little quiver too as you're doing this, and that just means that you're using the deeper intrinsic muscles of the socket muscles. Then we're gonna split the arms. So we're gonna go one arm overhead, one arm lower. I wouldn't go so far forward that your shoulder pulls off the table. And then I'm coming back to the center, same mechanical idea. So I reach. Another cue that I give is it's kind of like the collarbone is a rotisserie spigot. So the spigot stays stable. And then I just have these joints pivoting on either side. We'll do one more each way. And you might find that one shoulder really wants to peel up more easily as the arm drops forward. And it would be interesting to note if that's the side that bugs you more. Now we're gonna go arms out wide to the side. So here I say it's kind of like you're doing a gigantic hand clap. If we go back to energetics, it's like my heart is opening. And I'm gonna anchor my shoulders backwards in the socket like I'm standing the arm bone into the joint. We'll do one more time. And last one, because I think it's the most elusive, I'm gonna drop both arms down. I'm thinking of actively broadening my collarbone as I do that. Anchor shoulders backward to lift. One more time. Okay, in the next segment here, we're gonna practice separating arm movements from shoulder movements. You may be able to feel some of the connections that we talked about in the last series in this one. It's just a different plane, so now gravity isn't on my stomach, it's on the side of my body. So first I'm gonna play with that lowering and lifting. And then I'm gonna let that anchor, and I'm gonna do a little swivel. So it's kind of like you're just letting the bones stir in the socket. This can feel really relaxing. You're gonna reverse directions. Now, it's basically like the bottom tip of my shoulder blade. I want it tracing the seam of my racerback shirt and bra here. So as I go overhead,
I'm thinking about swiveling that tip all the way out to the side, and yes, your shoulder should be able to do this so that you can actually feel the inner tip of your shoulder blade at your armpit. To come in, what I see a lot of people do is they kind of karate chop. I call it like the Paul Bunyan chop in. And then they're just using the top of this when we really want to use the armpit muscles and the mid and upper back muscles. So what I'm thinking about doing is drawing that tip down and then wrapping it and pivoting it into the seam so that eventually it hits back into what I call home, so that the arm bone is in home as well as the shoulder blade. So I'm going overhead. And full disclosure, I've been doing these videos for years and I've never recorded this series because it can be really elusive to find without a second pair of hands. So try your best, but if you kind of look at me and you're like, what in the heck is she doing? I can't do that. Self-compassion, not judgment. So that was my full range of motion. Now I'm going to reach forward, but what I'm trying to do is I'm really just letting my arm fall as my shoulder blade reaches back towards the camera. And then to lift the arm, I'm going to pivot my shoulder blade to my spine to lift my arm. So it falls in the front. And I will repeat this on the front side so you can see it from the other direction. Okay, then I'm going to, so that was retraction of the shoulder blade. Now I'm going to protract. So I'm really, really, really going to reach. I'm going to try to keep my shoulder blade off to the side and then just lift my arm from the back of the armpit. So I want to feel this all back in here. You may want to kind of hold your shoulder to make sure it doesn't come up. And I will say I just changed my wrist position. Pinky to the ceiling, I think, is the easiest way to feel that. Okay, so repeating that, facing you. Okay, so I'm doing my arm overhead first. I'm really reaching to the side there. I'm gonna let it wrap and slide back. So if your back is really tight, this may not happen, so you may want to go back and foam roll your upper back and revisit some of the release work that we did earlier on. Then I'm going to let that stay anchored. I'm folding, and then I let it pull back towards my spine to lift my arm, so that my arm in and of itself is actually kind of weightless. I'm leveraging through my bones to lift the arm. I prefer this instead of the cue of the pinch your shoulder blades together because it kind of gets more into the subtleties of what the shoulder should be doing. So that was my retraction, and now I'm going to protract, protract, protract. I'm going to keep my shoulder there, and I'm going to reach up. I'm going to change my position here because I don't really feel, there it is. Now I feel it on the back of my armpit. You can see I'm more perpendicular to the camera now too.
This is another one that I'm going to do both sides at the same time, but I would encourage you to do on the shoulder that isn't bothering you and then repeat on the shoulder that is. Okay. You also may depend on your upper back position. You may want to put a little pillow here, a little towel. So I'm going to bring my shoulders down my back into home. I'm going to let my upper arm bones rotate open, and I'm going to lift my wrists. Try as much as possible to not cheat with lifting the fingertips up. It's the motion of the wrist is in line with the forearm. Okay, then when I find that maximal position, I'm going to lift my wrists up in the air, but I'm going to keep my elbows lower. But you're ideally going as high as you can go. And then I'm going to drop my elbows first and then drop my wrists. So it's wrists, elbows, elbows, wrists. You also want to make sure that you're staying at 90 degrees on both arms. So you're making like a field goal position from football. And depending upon the tension in your spine and in your back, you may feel a bit of lower back pressure. Then just don't push it too hard. One of the areas usually needing strength is the pec major, so breast tissue, chest tissue. Palm up, and you're trying to actively contract those muscles to pull your arm across your body. Then I'm slowly easing away. You're also trying to keep the elbow straight without, for women, I see more of this hyperextending the elbow. Men, a lot of times, if you've actively trained before, men tend to be a little bit more tense in their biceps, so their arms don't really hang straight. So men, you're really trying to kick your elbow straight to pull across. We'll do 2 more of those. Not going to repeat on the other side here because it would kind of change the angle. So just repeat on the other side. Okay, our last bit of activation here, you could have a band. I like having one and I want a pretty wide grip. Again, if you've got active frozen shoulder pain, this may feel completely and utterly impossible, so you'd want to try to get as best you can, but this is that fine line of, is too much activation not enough? You know, like rest versus pissing it off. So, and I will say this with full disclosure that when I started doing this after sitting in an office job for years, so this was 11 years ago, I could not do this for the life of me. And so it seems really simplistic, but it can also be really frustrating. So again, patience and compassion with yourself. So you're going to try to kick the arms straight. You're staying seated, equally weighted, and your arms are rotating overhead as far as you can go. Ideally, eventually, you're trying to get to here where it'll go all the way back. I know you're looking at me and eye rolling, but just that's where we're trying to go. The other thing that you're trying to do as you do that, and this is the part that felt impossible in the beginning, is to not arch your back, but you want to try to stay as neutral as possible in your spine. That's eventually what you're shooting for. So you're gradually going over like so. I'd say 3 to 10 times. I'm really bad about that with people. I just tell you to listen to your bodies. You also could play with pulsing. I can see how uneven my shoulders are now. So I'm thinking about shoulder blades going wide to pull that band wide, and you can kind of do that at different ranges of motion with elbows straight eventually. So thank you for watching. I did want to mention one thing that I forgot to mention in the last episode about the emotional aspect of shoulder impingement. This comes from a client who years ago, therapist client, who said, I talked about that I always thought that people would be more guarded in their hips. Particularly a lot of times yoga talks about that, about women being more guarded in their hips. And I said that I'd always found that the shoulders were definitely the harder thing for me to get into as a body worker. And this person said that it's all about that fight or flight instinct of you keep someone away with your arm, but then you also fight. So this is the fight or flight aspect. So just another little thing as you've been doing this today, if you felt a little bit of frustration, to maybe look at some of that aspect and see how that may play into what's going on in your body. Thanks for watching.